Moonshiners exclusive. Nervous groom Tickle gets hammered before his wedding day on tonight's hilarious edition of Moonshiners on Discovery. We have a classic case of the pre-wedding jitters as groom Tickle is mortified when he finds the guys setting out moonshine wedding favors. The tables are set, and his friends think they are doing a good thing until Tickle shows up. And it appears that the new Mrs. to-be has no clue as to the extent of his moonshining ways. In our exclusive clip, we see Henry and Tim Smith and Kenny working hard, thoughtfully gathering up 2 cases of moonshine. Their master plan: set the decorated wedding tables with bottles of it for the guests to sample. The guys initially notice the tables are all set with name cards and placeholders, except that Kenny is not a fan of sitting at the unlucky table 13, so he moves his place card to another one. As the guys are putting out the shine and rearranging the placeholders, in walks the nervous groom, Tickle. Looking a bit sweaty, he says, "What are y'all doing, fellas?" The guys share the good news that they brought the liquor, but that makes Tickle appear even more beside himself as he tries to explain that his old lady set up the room just the way she wanted it. Which also means no moonshine on the tables, thank you very much. Tim and Henry see how stressed Tickle is, and they offer him up sips of the shine, which brings back memories for Tickle. He seems to relax for a second, then realizes he needs to make the shine disappear. Fully anxious now, Tickle stutters and says, We gotta pick this stuff up. You know, Tim says that a light bulb is going off in his head. He realizes that Tickle has not come clean with the intended bride about the shine business. Explaining his situation, Tickle says, "What are you? What I'm saying is this: if she, his bride-to-be, is not happy that something's not right, she's gonna wanna kill me. I'm doing everything I can to make this right. Now all the guys get it." Henry says, "Tickle worked for us all summer, and he talked about this girl all summer long, and she's from Northern Virginia. I'm just concerned. Does she really know what he's doing? Has he told her that he was a moonshiner? Or does he tell her that he's a active moonshiner now?" After the guys go around and gather up all the shine, they need to stash it somewhere, and they find a closet in the room. And our green at the gills Tickle, he slugs back some moonshine and says, "Yeah, the shine bring a whole lot of memories back, and just for right now. All right, just for right now, okay? Get this stuff, moonshine, out of sight." On tonight's episode, all of Appalachia turns out for Tickle's first walk down the aisle. And Mark and Digger risk delivering strong shine and sweet justice. Also tonight, Josh removes all obstacles that stood in his way all season, while Mike gets served up some of his own medicine. Moonshiners exclusive. Nervous groom Tickle gets hammered before his wedding day in the small, rustic town of Brimstone Ridge. The air is thick with excitement, nerves, and the unmistakable aroma of homemade moonshine. It's a place where tradition runs deep, and the local moonshining business is as old as the hills that surround it. As the wedding bells prepare to toll, one groom-to-be, Tickle, finds himself in a familiar situation for any moonshiner, the kind of stress only a few shots of the finest shine could help ease. Tickle is not your average groom. In fact, his name alone, Tickle, should tell you that he's a bit of an eccentric. With a grin that could stretch from here to the edge of the Appalachian Mountains and a nervous energy that never quite dissipates, Tickle's wedding day should be one for the history books. But when you're a moonshiner in Brimstone Ridge, things don't always go according to the usual wedding script. In fact, the night before the wedding, Tickle found himself in a very unique predicament. He was getting hammered. The night before the wedding, Tickle paced the floor of the old cabin, the one nestled deep in the woods that served as both home and distillery for the Ridge's most notorious moonshining family. His fiancée Rose was back in town getting ready for her big day, surrounded by friends, family, and her bridesmaids. Meanwhile, Tickle was alone, caught in a whirlwind of anxiety. For most people, the night before a wedding is spent with quiet contemplation or final preparations. But for Tickle, it was an exercise in what felt like an emotional demolition derby. "I can't do this," he muttered to himself, taking a swig from the jug of moonshine that had been sitting on his kitchen table for the last few days. The jar was old, the glass worn with age, but it held a substance as smooth as silk, distilled with love and care by Tickle himself. He didn't plan to drink away his nerves, but the heat of the liquor spread through his chest and gave him a momentary sense of calm. It wasn't long, however, before every moonshiner dreads. He was drowning his fears in his own product. You see, moonshine is not just a drink in Brimstone Ridge. It's a tradition, a way of life. But that doesn't mean it's easy to drink it, especially when the weight of your own impending marriage presses down on you like a ton of bricks. Rose is perfect. Tickle sighed, taking another sip, his thoughts clouded by both the drink and his nervousness. But am I the guy she deserves? His mind raced. Was he ready for this? Was he truly the man Rose saw in him? Or was he just a man who had somehow lucked into a relationship with a woman as beautiful, kind, and intelligent as her? He had always been the wild one in the family, the one who could charm his way into or out of anything with his quick wit and easy grin. But could he really settle down? Could he give up his carefree life, his late-night moonshining, and endless days spent in the woods for something as permanent as marriage? Tickle's thoughts were a cocktail of confusion and dread. And the more he drank, the more the reality of his situation became blurred. Moonshine, nerves, and the shackles of tradition. The moonshine he sipped on was, admittedly, potent. As the night stretched on, he found himself teetering between moments of clear-headedness and complete disorientation. He stumbled outside to the fire pit behind the cabin, sitting heavily on a weathered log. The firelight flickered in his eyes, casting a warm, almost magical glow on the surrounding trees. In the distance, he could hear the call of an owl, the rustle of leaves in the wind. It was peaceful here, away from the chaos of the world and the expectations that came with his upcoming wedding. For a moment, he allowed himself to close his eyes and imagine the rest of his life with Rose. He could picture it: mornings spent with coffee, evenings spent on the porch, the two of them laughing together, building a life from the ground up. But then his nerves hit him again, like a tidal wave crashing over him. "I don't know if I'm ready," Tickle muttered, his voice barely audible above the crackling of the fire. "What if I screw this up?" Hay reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small silver flask. Another gift from his father. The flask had been passed down through generations of Moonshiners, a family heirloom that had been filled countless times over the years with their finest batches of shine. It was the drink of choice for men who had to make tough decisions, and Tickle needed something to calm the storm inside his chest. His fingers trembled as he unscrewed the cap. The first sip hit him like a freight train, its burn leaving a trail of warmth in its wake. He felt it in his throat, in his chest, in the tips of his fingers as the alcohol began to course through his veins. He leaned back on the log, his thoughts swimming. The sky above him was as dark as his thoughts, but for the first time in hours, he felt a semblance of peace. He could feel the weight of his nervousness lifting, the tension in his body loosening as he slowly allowed himself to give in to the feeling of release. The night stretched on. Time seemed to lose all meaning as Tickle continued to drink, the moonshine becoming both his salvation and his downfall. His mind wandered to memories of his family, the times he had spent with Rose, the wild days of running through the woods and making moonshine in the secret stills hidden beneath the trees. But now he was no longer that reckless young man. Now he was a man on the brink of something far greater, a life with someone who meant everything to him. But could he make it work? A change of heart as the fire burned down to embers, Tickle had a moment of clarity. His thoughts began to line up, one after another, as if a veil had been lifted from his eyes. Sure, he was scared, and sure, he had doubts. But what man didn't? Marriage was not just a commitment to another person, it was a commitment to yourself. And Tickle realized in that instant that he was ready. Maybe not for the first time in his life, but for the right reasons. His father had always said, "Son, don't rush into anything, but when you know, you'll know." And Tickle knew. He knew that Rose was the one. He knew that despite his fears, despite the questions that still lingered in his mind, he could do this. He would do this. He had to. The next morning, he awoke with a start, his head pounding from the alcohol. His cabin was a mess, the remnants of the previous night scattered everywhere. The once perfect jug of moonshine now sat half empty on the table. But for all his disheveled state, one thing was clear. Tickle had made a decision. Tickle grabbed his jacket, wiped the sleep from his eyes, and made his way to town. The wedding wasn't for a few more hours, but he knew he needed to get there early. It was time to face his fears, face his future, and most importantly, face Rose. As he walked to the chapel, he could already hear the faint hum of